This is a story called Bleeding Moon's Silent Howl by Scare in a Box, under the subreddit TheCrypticCompendium. No, we're going there today, Chris. He always tells us he's not home, always says he can't see us. He lives like a recluse. I don't want my relationship with my brother to end up like yours and your sister's. First of all, ouch, Chris said. And second, the guy likes his peace. I vote that it'd be better to let him be. He doesn't like being with people, and he stays off everyone's business, so don't think this is a good idea. Susan sighed and glanced at the back seat. Her son, Pete, bobbed with the car, mouth hanging open in a peaceful sleep. The full moon's glow gave the child a funny shape to his eyebrows. I don't want Pete to grow up without knowing his uncle. Jesus, fine, okay. Chris turned the blinker on and turned right. The mountain came into full view after the turn. There, near the top, shone a porch light. Susan recognized her brother's cabin. So, Robert was home. At least call him. I don't want to catch him with his pants down. Chris handed Susan her phone. Fine. Robert's number was on her favorite list, even though they rarely called each other. Since Robert had that freak accident on his prom night, he had been distant, almost reclusive. Susan, being the youngest, was never given many details. All she knew was that he disappeared over a week and was found in a burned clearing in a forest, except he was naked and without a single scratch on his body. Robert had never given any explanations. Rumors that the scorched trees had pentagrams and symbols best left alone circulated heavily when she was in high school a year after him, but she chose to ignore them. She knew her brother. He was a nerd, a simple guy, overly shy, but with a good heart. She reminded herself of this, of his heart, and clicked his contact. He picked up after 3 rings. Suze? His voice appeared strained. Panicked, maybe. Hey, Rob. Look, we were just passing through town, and I know you're something of a night owl, so I was wondering if we could stop by, maybe even... No, I'm sorry, Suze. I really am. But now's just not a good time. I'm not even home. Well, your porch light is on, then. He was silent for a moment. What? She squinted. The full moon reflected against the hood of the green sedan, right there in the distance. Dark clouds passed in front of it, crisscrossing its light. And your car's in the driveway. Jesus, Suze, you know better than to creep up on me like that. Creep up on you? Rob, how old is your nephew? Silence. You don't remember, do you? Well, that's the reason why I'm creeping up on you. Her voice turned softer. You can't run from family, especially not from me. Robert sighed. I'm sorry, Suze. I told you I'm not home. Just turn back, okay? The dark clouds parted and the moon was free to shine. His breath suddenly turned rage. God, Suze, I've got to go. I'm not in my damned home, so just turn back now, you hear me? He hung up. The car was silent for a moment. Babe, you good? Chris asked. Just drive up. Susan, I don't think we should bother him. Well, I think you should stop talking, Susan replied. Pete yawned and stretched. We there yet? He asked. I want to play. In a minute, Pete, Susan said sweetly. We're just going to visit Uncle Rob. Who? Asked the child. Susan's first hunch was that something was wrong. Calling the police was only her second. Robert's porch light was on, his sedan was on the driveway, and his front door was wide open. Everything was dark inside the house. Babe, Susan said to Chris, afraid. If Robert was not home, then who was? Pete picked up a basketball and tried to throw it at the loop, impervious to the situation. Chris paced back and squinted at the house. Hey, buddy, he called Pete. Would you do Daddy a favor and wait in the car? Oh, but I want to play. Not now, Pete. Wait in the car. Pete stomped angrily and slammed the car door, but neither Chris nor Susan gave any importance. Not a second later, Pete opened the car door and said, Look! He was pointing at the sky. The moon was gaining a rust-like tint. A lunar eclipse, Susan said, her attention on everything except the moon. She heard something, a step, coming from inside the house. There, in the upstairs room, movement. Jesus, Chris, she pointed at the window, but there seemed to be nothing there now. Okay, Chris took a deep breath. Wait out here, keep an eye on Pete, and he went inside. In the short minutes Chris was gone, Susan played a phone game with Pete, though her mind wandered. Robert had become more withdrawn after his accident. She had noticed he'd become more superstitious. He had kept a meticulous lunar calendar next to his desk, had avoided black cats like they were the plague, and had thrown out everything made of silver despite their mother's pleas. There were nights on which he sneaked off, always full moon nights, jotted down in his little lunar calendar. She recalled not sleeping, staring out the window to see Robert running away into the woods behind their house. Always, she thought of following him. Always, she opted not to. She didn't know whether it was drugs or some kind of cult thing. Robert had always been nice to her and respected her privacy, so it was her duty to do the same. "No one's home," Chris said, stepping out. "If there was anyone inside, then I think we scared them off when we arrived." "You think there was someone in there?" Susan asked. Chris shrugged. "The front door doesn't appear to have been forced open, and the rooms are messy, but not stolen messy. Anyways, Rob's not here, babe." "But someone was." "But someone might have been," Chris corrected. They heard running and saw Pete running up the porch into the house. "Explore!" he yelled. "Hey, Pete!" Susan screamed after the kid. Pete had found a new toy. It was a really cool stuffed werewolf, as big as his legs, with big eyes and big teeth and lots of muscles. He wished he had lots of muscles. His mom and dad had nagged at him for running into the house, but they were the ones who said it was empty in the first place. But now he had found the toy in the wardrobe of the biggest room. He was already thinking about how to nicely ask Mom to keep it. The room was pretty, mainly now that it was cast in red from the very red moon. Why was the moon red? He made a mental note to ask Mom, but he rapidly forgot as he pretended to roar and attack the chair with the werewolf. His dad had called someone named Police. Pete got the feeling this police was coming for something bad, but if no one was home, then what was so bad about it? Oh, right. He shouldn't ask Mom to keep the toy. He should ask Uncle Rob, whoever he was. He swirled the werewolf around and threw it at a wall. It was heavier than he expected, and it thudded hard when it hit. Pete got an idea and mentally aimed for a trash bin in the corner of the room. He ran and kicked the werewolf. It really was harder than he had thought, almost fleshy. The toy flew against the other wall. "What are you doing, Pete?" Mom asked. "Playing. Want to play stuffed soccer with me?" he replied. "Don't mess up Uncle Rob's toys, okay? He might get very angry with you. Be careful." "Susan?" Dad called from somewhere in the corridor. "The cops said they're on their way. 20 minutes and they'll be here." 20 minutes? Pete heard his mother nagging as she went out of the bedroom. "Why the hell will they take that long?" Pete kicked the werewolf again. This time, a little seam ripped open on the werewolf's belly. "Oof," Pete hissed. His mom would get mad. Or worse, his dad would get mad. Or even worse, Uncle Rob would get mad. He picked the werewolf up. And look, the insides of it were so fluffy. He bet he could make a nice pillow out of that white stuff. The toy seemed to vibrate as Pete took the stuffing out and made it a perfect rectangle. Oh yes, it was very soft. It'd make a nice pillow. It could even be a gift for Mom or Uncle Rob. That way no one would get mad at him for ruining the toy, as he'd give them a gift. The red moon started going away below the mountain, turning from red to white again. Pete sighed, but kept on making his pillow. He liked that shade of red. It was the same color as his socks, and he really liked his socks. A while later, blue and red lights flashed outside. He peeked out to see the last glimpse of the moon as it faded down the horizon, and a man and a woman in ugly blue clothes stepping out of the flashy car. When he noticed, there was a sickly metal and meaty smell, and his hands were all slick and wet. Susan screamed. Chris screamed. Somewhere she heard one of the cops doubling down and retching. Robert's bedroom was filled with blood and gore. Pete was drenched in red up to his neck, and in his hands was something, pulsing and squirting. A heart. A real human heart. Her head felt too light, black spots blackening her vision. Pete was sobbing. "Mom?" he was calling, but she couldn't move. She followed her son's eyes. In the corner of the room was a suit of skin, perfectly ripped out, as if whoever that had been only been made of muscle and had had to wear a fake shell. The deflated face with holes for eyes and a mouth had blonde stubble, blonde hair, and a mole next to the nose. Just like her. Just like Robert. Oh, God. Oh, please, God, no. What had Pete done? He had just been playing with that stuffed werewolf. But she had heard how heavy it was, how odd it... The figure she had seen in the window. The figure hadn't gotten away. It had gotten smaller. Robert. Poor cursed Robert, who had run away on full moons. Mommy, Daddy. Bawling. Pete was bawling. Bones and open intestines surrounded Pete like a shrine to death itself. The heart in his hand squirted one last time and came to a stop. The cop touched the suit of the skin with the tip of its boot, and it was like pushing a pile of slimy wet paper. There were a few gray hairs on Robert's hands. The gray hairs retreated as the last few wisps of the full moon faded behind the mountain, giving place to the stars and darkness. That was a story called Bleeding Moon, Silent Howl by Scarnabox, under the subreddit The Cryptic Compendium. Thank you so much for listening, and we hope to see you next time.